such a warm welcome, and I'm thrilled to be with you all, and I'm very gracious for the hospitality this parish extended me and my family last month as we were living in Grace House. And this will come as no surprise to you. As Marjorie mentioned, she and I share the alma mater. It took 2 decades and a capital campaign just to get the university back up to 100% after she left. Billions of dollars. There was a rich man who. Anytime Jesus begins one of his parables with a rich man, you know it won't end well for that person. Shortly before our gospel passage for today, Jesus told one of these parables to the crowd and his disciples. It's the parable of the rich man whose fields produce an abundance of crops. Knucklehead that he is, he decides to tear down his inadequate old barns and build newer, bigger barns. And he is so pleased with himself. He tells himself, "Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry." God shows up later that night and tells our rich man that he will die. So what use is it to him or to others that all of this abundance is squirreled away? Today's gospel reading, like this passage shortly before it, is about trust. And this passage offers us 2 vignettes about trust and its antithesis, anxiety. The Bible is replete with God's promises. Promises that God always keeps. And time and again, God reminds Israel and us today of his covenant loyalty with mankind and with his people. Yet we do not trust these promises completely. In the reading from Isaiah today, we read God expressing his deep displeasure with the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, the poster children for what not to do in the Bible. Their sin was not in worshiping improperly. No, they were doing it by the book. Their liturgy professor would have given them an A+ for worshiping Yahweh. But they didn't trust in Torah's commands to look after the needs of the widow, of the poor, the orphan, the prisoner, the stranger in their midst. You see, God promises the people that they will have enough. Enough food, shelter, justice, and peace. But they've got to look after the marginalized groups in their midst. Now, this was a people who had been through a lot. They had been through wandering in the desert. They had known famine and oppression. So it's understandable that they had the only naturally human response to such memories, reluctance to share. They didn't trust in the promise that there would be enough. And so the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and many others like them, couldn't appreciate that God had seen them through those lean times. They only trusted in their anxieties about future wants. They were concerned with storing up goods for their own preservation, and in so doing, neglected those who had nothing in the here and now. You see, God shunned their ritual that was devoid of moral response to the covenant. What good comes from observing the ritual calendar, using the right amount of incense, wearing the proper color, if you're ignoring the plight of the hungry and the poor, the homeless, the needy? Right worship is dependent upon right action outside of the temple, outside of the synagogue, outside of this church. And we see the same anxiety and trust issues in today's gospel. Jesus knows our all too human concern for our future. So he tells us that it is the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. But he follows this with the command to sell our possessions and give alms. Don't be anxious. You'll have enough. The kingdom is yours. But this concern for accruing wealth, possessions, shelter, justice for ourselves comes from an understandable, relatable place. Who doesn't want the stability and security that these things can provide? Many of us have mouths at home that we're responsible for. Of course we need to look after our best interests. So our instinct is to protect what we have, what we earn, what we believe and are convinced is ours. So if we're not burying our treasure like pirates, we're squirreling it away to accrue more interest, or spending it left and right to amass more stuff, or electing politicians that we know suit our best interests. And we hear conflicting messages in our society. Consume, save, consume. Which one is it? We are mired in a relentless tug of war between these two philosophies of what we are to do with our resources. Either way, the message is one can never have enough. And the problem is that we are never satisfied. But in pursuing those needs, those around us who are actually in need aren't satisfied either. We don't trust that we will be all right. We don't trust God's promises that we will have enough if we care for those who are less well off. We make the assumption that there's not enough goods, not enough justice to go around for everyone. And so we hoard our treasure. And when we find ourselves with a superabundance of goods, like the rich man, we want to rent another storage unit to hold it all. That's my sin. We were renting a house, a 4-bedroom house near the church where my wife was the youth director. And seeing this big empty house for 2 people, both of our families decided that we would make excellent repositories for family furniture. Oh, Matt and Elizabeth, they have plenty of room. They need this oversized couch. No, we didn't, but we took it. And so when seminary forced the issue of downsizing, I'm talking a 4-bedroom house to 750 square feet, we had to make some decisions. So we donated a lot. I made several trips to the Goodwill. But we couldn't bring ourselves to part with family pieces and a lot of other stuff. What were we to do with this stuff? We rented a large storage unit to hold everything that we couldn't take. Now, I don't take Jesus' words in the gospel today to sell every possession, but we sure could have divested ourselves of a lot more than we did. And I'm left with the question, what would-be alms are sitting in that storage unit collecting dust? How could I be better serving the community of those around me with that money I'm spending renting that storage unit? And there's another level of trust and anxiety operating in our passage from Luke. This gospel was written sometime around 80 AD, about 50 or so years after the crucifixion of Christ. 50 years after the first promises were made that he would return in triumph, bringing an end to this world and a glorious beginning of a new one. So many first-century Christians likely began to wonder, what's going on? Didn't Jesus tell us that many alive today would live to see the Messiah come again? In an era with much shorter lifespans than today, it is understandable that patience was beginning to run a bit thin. This issue of trust and anxiety, God promises against our anxiety. And in light of this anxiety, we begin to doubt and ask negative questions. And Luke has Jesus address this anxiety in the appeal to be ready. That the Master will come again at an unexpected hour. The Son of Man will come back. And that those who are prepared, those who are ready, will be able to join with him in a glorious, magnificent, messianic banquet. Sounds good. Luke is telling his audience, don't give up hope. The promise still stands. We must be ready. Okay, Luke, but what does this being ready look like? And we've already seen a bad example in our rich man from earlier. He was prepared. He was more than prepared. He saw that he had a superabundance and so built extra storehouses. He was set for years to come. But you know that's not what Jesus meant here. The point is not to be prepared only for yourself. You see, being prepared means fulfilling your responsibility to Torah's command to love God and love your neighbor. And in that so doing, the widow, the orphan, stranger, those in need of laundry love in your midst are taken care of. I don't think it's a small coincidence that last week we observed the anniversary of one of our nation's most venerable institutions, the United States Coast Guard, who has as its motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. The Coast Guard helps those in need, regardless of circumstances. Before giving aid, they don't stop the boat and say, wait a minute, do these people deserve to be in the mess they're in? They offer assistance freely. They understand what it means to be the keeper of one's sisters and brothers. And this same vigilance, this same constant preparedness to help others, that is what it means to be a servant prepared for one's master's return. We are called to have our house in order, not to be reveling in our master's absence by raiding the pantry for a self-indulgent bite and drink for the here and now. We are to have a house that has obeyed the commands to take care of the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the stranger. Forget whether you have observed all the ceremonial pomp of vacuuming the carpets and immaculately setting the table. That's not what matters. Ultimately, this apocalyptic foreshadowing of Jesus' return at an unexpected hour, with his stern warning to be ready, should give us all pause. Am I ready? Are you ready? Are we as a people, a nation, ready? Or are we like Sodom and Gomorrah, meticulous in our observance of ritual, but failing to care for the destitute in our midst? What does it mean for a nation that doesn't trust God's promise of enough for all, and so fails those on the margins? We are called to be servants to one another, by looking to each other's needs, by showing concern for one another and those outside our walls and gates. We ensure that we are trusting in God's providence for us. By loving others as ourselves, we honor our end of the covenant, and our incense in solemn assemblies will again be pleasing to God. God keeps promises. God never fails to provide for us as we need provisioning. The onus is not on us to worry about whether or not we will have enough food, shelter, or justice next year or the year after. The onus is on us to look to those whom we know don't have enough of those things today. When we cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, and plead for the widow,